Before anyone saw the helicopter, before the alarm split the cold pre-dawn quiet, before the country understood what was about to unfold, there was only the thrum of rotor blades slicing through the dark sky. A sound no one expected at that hour. A sound that felt out of place, until it wasn't. Because in just a few minutes, Sweden would witness one of the most cinematic robberies in modern history. A crime so bold, so coordinated, so impossibly precise, that investigators later admitted it felt like watching a Hollywood heist come to life. Only no one yelled cut, and nothing was fake. And if you're hearing this, you're already inside the story. But before we jump into one of the most unbelievable criminal operations ever executed, make sure you subscribe, because you do not want to miss what's coming next in this series. Trust me, every episode peels back the curtain on crimes so audacious, they redefine what humanity is capable of when ambition meets desperation. This is episode 3 of Dark Ledger, presented to you by Elearn College. A podcast where we walk you step by step into the shadows of human intention, where logic bends, morality fractures, and the impossible becomes real. Today, we revisit the early morning of September 23, 2009, the day Sweden looked up at the sky and realized crime had grown wings. The security guard inside the G4S cash depot in Stockholm later said the same thing every witness said. At first, I thought I was imagining it. It was 5:18 a.m., a time when the world is silent, the streets empty, and minds halfway between sleep and consciousness. He heard a deep pulsing hum, distant at first, then closer, then unmistakable. A helicopter. Not flying overhead. Not passing by. Descending. Onto the roof of his building. The guard froze. Not because helicopters were unusual, but because this helicopter had no flight plan, no authorization, and no reason to be there. Before he could call it in, the entire structure shuddered as the aircraft landed on the reinforced rooftop. Then came the footsteps, heavy boots striking metal, and then the first blow. A sledgehammer crashing down, echoing through the stairwell. Glass exploding, doors cracking, and masked men shouting through the corridors with military precision. The guard dove behind a wall and pressed the emergency button, but he already knew help would be slow. The building was fortified, but it wasn't designed for this. No one imagined criminals would simply drop in from the sky. No one, except the people who planned it. In less than 3 minutes, Sweden had entered a new chapter of criminal history. To understand how a group of thieves outsmarted an entire country's security infrastructure, grounding police, trapping officers, disabling roads, and vanishing with millions, you need to understand Sweden in 2009. This was a nation proud of its safety. Banks, cash depots, and armored transports operated under the assumption of order. Violence was rare. Large-scale heists were almost unheard of. The country's police force was professional and efficient, built on trust rather than heavy militarization. This environment created an unexpected vulnerability. Sweden didn't prepare for what it didn't believe could happen. The G4S cash handling depot in Västberga, just outside Stockholm, processed massive amounts of currency every day. It was a secure facility, steel doors, alarm systems, 24-hour surveillance, locks designed to withstand small explosions. But all of this protection was oriented toward the ground. No one planned for a threat arriving vertically. Which is why, on that early morning, a stolen Bell 206 Jet Ranger was able to descend unnoticed until it was too late. Its pilot had perfect control. Investigators later said whoever flew it was either deeply experienced or extremely confident, possibly both. He guided the helicopter toward the rooftop landing zone with the ease of someone who'd done it many times before. Below him, a team of masked men prepared for the breach. This was no amateur crew. They had military-grade sledgehammers, explosives, Kevlar gear, and a getaway strategy that accounted for every possible police response. And at that exact moment, every predicted police response was already being neutralized. 5 kilometers away at the police aviation hangar, an officer walking toward his shift found something unusual sitting directly in front of the hangar door. A large black duffel bag, duct-taped, rigid, with a bright label taped to the top that said one word. Bomb squads were called. The hangar was sealed. Helicopters grounded. This wasn't an accident. The thieves had calculated the radius, response time, and flight paths of every police helicopter in Stockholm. They knew the only realistic threat to their escape was airborne interception. So they took the sky away from law enforcement before anyone realized the crime had begun. Minutes later, police patrol units responding by car would find themselves encountering another unexpected obstacle. Spike strips. Not one, not two. Several. Organized in a pattern specifically designed to shred tires, rupture engines, and trap vehicles before they could get close to the cash depot. Officers driving at speed watched their dashboards light up with warnings as rubber tore apart under them. Patrol cars skidded, swerved, and ground to a halt. Radio operators struggled to redirect units that were now stranded miles away. Everything the thieves touched had been prepared in advance, like chess pieces moved hours before the first blow of the sledgehammer. Back at the depot, the break-in had begun. When the masked men descended from the helicopter, the operation was executed with astonishing speed. Each movement was crisp, practiced, almost silent except for the calculated violence of their tools. They approached the first glass skylight on the rooftop and drove a sledgehammer down with full force. The reinforced pane cracked, then shattered, raining shards into the stairwell. Next came the charges. Small, controlled, but powerful enough to blow internal steel doors off their hinges. The explosives were arranged with expertise, minimal risk of fire, maximum effect on structural locks. Inside, security cameras captured only fragments of movement. Dark figures sprinting through hallways, masks reflecting the glow of overhead lights, the beams of flashlights cutting across the floor. Their target was the heart of the building. The vault chamber holding between 40 and 80 million kroner in cash, the equivalent of roughly $5.3 million USD. It was money earmarked for banks, ATMs, cash couriers, and businesses across Stockholm, packed, sorted, and ready. The thieves had minutes to reach it. And they did. One more explosive charge. One more thunderous blast. And the vault cracked open like a metal egg, spilling rows of bundled cash into the path of men ready to take everything they could carry. They worked like a harvesting crew. Collect, stack, bag, move. There was no shouting, no hesitation. Everything was methodical. Above them, the rotor blades were still spinning. The helicopter stayed warm, engine running, pilot watching the sky. They weren't just robbing a building. They were robbing time. Unlike typical heists, where escape routes are horizontal, cars, tunnels, trains, this one ended in the clouds. The thieves dragged bag after bag of stolen cash toward the rooftop access, where a winch and harness system awaited. This part of the plan required absolute trust between the men below and the pilot above. If the timing was off, if a rope snagged, if the weight distribution shifted at the wrong moment, someone would fall. But the system held. Each bag was clipped, lifted, and swung into the helicopter. Then another. And another. Some investigators later theorized that the helicopter may have been modified to handle the extra stress and weight. The planning was too precise for luck. As dawn crept closer, the building filled with the smell of smoke and dust, alarms finally blaring through every stairwell. But police were still struggling to reach the depot. Every delay was working in the thieves' favor. And then, at 5:39 a.m., the helicopter lifted from the rooftop. Slow at first, then gaining altitude, disappearing into the pale Swedish sky like a ghost dissolving at sunrise. The entire robbery, from landing to takeoff, took less than 20 minutes. A military-level operation executed by civilians armed with nothing but sledgehammers, explosives, and the one machine authorities never expected criminals to use. What happened after that would spark one of the most frustrating investigations in Swedish history. Because the helicopter didn't just vanish. It vanished perfectly. The helicopter slipped westward, hugging low altitudes to avoid radar visibility. The pilot knew Stockholm's air corridors intimately, every tower, every bridge, every transmission line. He maneuvered with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this flight path again and again, perhaps even in the very same helicopter. Below them, the city was just beginning to wake. A handful of early risers, delivery trucks, the distant hum of rail lines. None of them knew that above their heads, $5 million in stolen cash was floating through the dawn. The pilot banked sharply and headed toward a stretch of forested land outside Stockholm, a location chosen not for convenience, but for invisibility. Hidden from the main roads, shielded from the open sky by tree canopies, and, crucially, far enough away that police, still stranded by shredded tires and grounded helicopters, could not reach it in time. At 5:55 a.m., the Jet Ranger descended into a clearing and settled quietly onto the forest floor. The men jumped out, the cash was offloaded, and within minutes, the helicopter was abandoned. Doors left open, rotor cooling, no prints, no personal items, no trace of identity. It didn't matter. The thieves were already gone. By the time authorities reached the depot, learned of the fake bomb at the aviation hangar, cleared the spike strips and dispatched units to the forest, the robbers had vanished into the city's maze of roads and housing. The heist was over. Now came the aftermath. If the robbery itself felt like a movie, the investigation felt like a political thriller. News of Sweden's first helicopter heist spread instantly. International media broke into morning broadcasts, with headlines calling it one of the most spectacular robberies of the decade. The public was stunned. Schools, homes, workplaces buzzed with the same question. How did they pull it off? And even more baffling, how did they escape? Swedish police faced immense pressure. This wasn't just a robbery, it was an embarrassment. Every weakness in the system had been exploited. Air response paralyzed, road units disabled, alarms outrun, and someone had clearly known exactly how Swedish law enforcement operated. So investigators moved quickly, forming a multi-agency task force that included air traffic analysts, military pilots, organized crime specialists, forensic teams, financial investigators, counter-terror police. This wasn't a simple smash and grab. It was a coordinated assault on Sweden's security architecture, which raised an unsettling thought. Whoever planned this had inside information. The first break in the case came from an unexpected source, a local resident near the helicopter's final landing site. He'd seen men running through the forest just after sunrise. Not suspicious at first, but when he heard the news later that morning, he called it in. That lead brought police to the abandoned helicopter, still warm. No blood, no damage, no crash marks. It had been flown expertly. But here's where the story twists. The helicopter wasn't just stolen. It was stolen from a flight school. A flight school where one particular student had recently logged hours, practicing landings, reviewing flight paths, learning to operate the exact same model of aircraft used in the heist. His name was known to police. A former military conscript. A man with a history of petty crime and, more importantly, connections. Connections to the criminal underworld. Connections to people who had attempted similar, but far less successful, heists in the past. Connections to someone who had been asking unusual questions about the G4S depot. His name would soon become central to the investigation. Sami the pilot Hussein. Except his involvement was not as straightforward as it seemed. The precision of the robbery led many investigators to a single conclusion. Someone inside the cash depot must have helped. One of the vault managers noticed something alarming. The thieves targeted the exact vault that held the highest volume of fresh currency, newly processed cash that had arrived only hours before. This wasn't public information. It wasn't even widely known among staff. It suggested someone with knowledge of internal schedules, cash volumes, and security shifts. Police began interviewing employees, then former employees, then contractors, then anyone who had ever worked on the depot's alarm system. A pattern soon emerged. A former G4S employee had recently been terminated after repeatedly attempting to access restricted areas. As investigators dug deeper, they learned he had financial troubles and friends who were involved in organized crime. His phone records showed late-night calls to someone else under suspicion. His car had been spotted near the hangar where the fake bomb was planted. And he had taken out a short-term loan days before the robbery, despite earning little and having no way to pay it back. Was he the inside man? Not necessarily, but he certainly wasn't clean. Then came another discovery. G4S had been replacing parts of its roof structure shortly before the heist. Workers had been up there, measuring, marking, installing temporary panels. And one of those workers had connections to a group of criminals known for planning robberies that never quite materialized. Police began to suspect this was bigger than any one insider. This was a network with money problems, a network with access, a network with ambition, a network that had just pulled off the most daring theft in Swedish history. As forensics teams combed through the helicopter, they discovered something unexpected. A small piece of adhesive tape stuck deep inside the rear cabin. Someone had used it to secure equipment, maybe even the winch system. On that tape were fibers, and those fibers matched the uniform of a specific flight school. That was enough to bring in Sami Hussein for questioning. He denied everything. Polite, calm, cooperative. But he couldn't explain why his phone had been turned off for exactly the duration of the robbery. He couldn't explain why he had recently visited the very hangar where the fake bomb was placed. He couldn't explain why a witness saw someone who resembled him near the stolen helicopter days before the heist. Still, police didn't have enough to charge him. Not until they tracked down another suspect, a former Yugoslavian MMA fighter with a history of high-risk robberies. He had purchased several items weeks before the heist. Heavy-duty sledgehammers, industrial rope, tactical harnesses, flashlights, plastic explosives, allegedly for demolition work. When police raided his home, they found handwritten notes, landing coordinates, building schematics, rough calculations of cash weight. His explanation: he said it was all part of a script he was writing. The police didn't laugh. Arrests multiplied. 10 men in total, each with unclear roles. Some guilty, some possibly not. But none of them talked, none of them identified the mastermind, and none of them revealed where the money had gone. That silence told investigators one thing: the true architect of the heist was still out there. Sweden was changing. People who once believed their country was immune to cinematic crime were now discussing corruption, security flaws, police vulnerabilities, criminal sophistication. The boldness of the new generation of organized crime. Public trust dipped. Politicians demanded answers. Security companies scrambled to review their protocols. Cash depots upgraded their roofs. police aviation hangars installed triple-layered security, airspace monitoring was expanded. But as the months passed, something became painfully clear. The money was gone, not a single krona recovered. No large deposits, no suspicious spending, no sightings of the cash bags. It was as if the millions had evaporated, which led investigators to a dark theory. The money was never meant to re-enter circulation. It may have been hidden, buried, exported, or held by someone powerful enough to keep the entire crew silent. Someone whose identity remains a mystery even today. But the story wasn't over. Because soon investigators would discover something that changed everything they thought they knew about the heist. A revelation that pointed to an even more shocking truth. That the mastermind might not have been inside the depot, but inside the police. The working theory that the heist had an inside man at the cash depot made sense at first. But as investigators dug deeper, a new pattern emerged, one more unsettling than anyone expected. Some of the robbers seemed to know police response protocols with uncanny accuracy. They predicted radio dead zones, timed their explosives to coincide with shift rotations, and knew exactly how long it would take the aviation unit to mobilize. This wasn't just someone who understood the depot. This was someone who understood police behavior. And someone had tipped them off about one crucial vulnerability. That by placing a suspicious package labeled bomb at the aviation hangar, police helicopters would be grounded instantly, no questions asked, until the bomb squad cleared it. That wasn't common knowledge, that wasn't public protocol, that was internal. Investigators quietly began reviewing every police officer who had connections to any of the arrested suspects. They combed through email logs, service histories, disciplinary actions, and personal contacts. Then they found him, a mid-level officer, well-liked, no criminal record. But with one detail that stood out, he had gone to school with one of the primary suspects years before the robbery. Not a close friend, not someone he met recently, but someone he had grown up with, someone he still exchanged brief messages with occasionally. And 2 weeks before the robbery, they had met in person for the first time in years. The officer insisted it was a coincidence, just two old acquaintances catching up. But his statements didn't match witness timelines, and phone mast data placed him near the stolen helicopter's storage hangar days before the robbery. It wasn't enough to charge him. But it was enough to shift the narrative. This heist was not simply a group of criminals exploiting Sweden's weaknesses. It might have been engineered by someone who once wore the badge. Someone who understood how to slip through the cracks. Someone who had been planning this for years. When the 10 suspects stood trial, Sweden watched with fascination. The courtroom was packed. Reporters jammed the hallways. The air was thick with anticipation. Prosecutors described the robbery as a military-style operation executed with surgical precision. They presented flight school logs showing practice sessions, hardware store purchases matching the equipment used, surveillance footage, cell tower triangulation, DNA traces, witness testimonies, highway cameras showing vehicles leaving the forest. But something unexpected happened. Despite the mountains of evidence, the case kept collapsing. One suspect's DNA was ruled inconclusive. Another's alibi, though improbable, was technically valid. Several pieces of evidence were circumstantial. The prosecution was convinced these were the right men, but the law required certainty. In the end, 2 suspects were acquitted outright. Others received light sentences. None served more than 7 years. The courtroom buzzed with shock. 7 years for a crime involving explosives, armed intrusion, and millions stolen. The message was clear. You can commit the most cinematic robbery in Swedish history and walk free within a decade. The public reaction was divided. Some felt outrage. Others felt admiration, not for the criminals but for the audacity of the plan. And for many, the trial only deepened the mystery. If these were the men who carried out the robbery, where were the millions? Who controlled the cash? And why had no one broken silence? The prosecutors admitted it openly. We believe there were others involved, people who have not been identified. The stolen 39 million kronor didn't reappear. Banks across Scandinavia monitored for unusual deposits. Currency trackers were deployed. Cash detection dogs searched storage lockers. Border agents kept a heightened watch. Nothing. It was as though the money had been swallowed by the earth. One investigator proposed a theory. The cash may have been immediately moved to a safe house in another country, possibly the Balkans, where several suspects had ties. Another theory suggested the money had been buried, wrapped, stored, waiting. A third, more chilling theory whispered within law enforcement circles was that the mastermind had double-crossed the crew, that only one or two people knew where the money was, and that the rest of the team were pawns. If that theory was true, then the Stockholm helicopter robbery wasn't just a heist. It was a betrayal. But without evidence, the file remained open. Today, not a single Swedish krona from the robbery has been recovered. The heist had consequences that stretched far beyond the immediate crime scene. Cash depots across the country redesigned their facilities. Helicopter landing deterrents were added to every roof. Airspace surveillance was expanded. Police response protocols were rewritten. Security companies began coordinating with military flight units. Spike strip vulnerability assessments were conducted. Sweden, often seen as peaceful, orderly, predictable, had been forced to confront the reality that its systems could be manipulated. And for many citizens, the heist became a symbol of a country entering a new era, one where crime was no longer amateur, no longer small-scale, and no longer predictable. It was the moment when Sweden realized the world had changed. Some questions still haunt the investigators who worked the case. Who planted the fake bomb at the police hangar? It was not functional, it was a prop, but it worked perfectly. Who scouted the depot roof weeks before the heist? Workers claimed they had seen someone who didn't belong but never reported it. Who was the true mastermind? The trial suspects were competent, but not genius-level planners. Who handled the money? $5 million is not easy to hide, store, or transport. And perhaps the most haunting question: why did the operation feel so cinematic? Because what happened in Stockholm that morning wasn't just a robbery. It was a demonstration. Someone wanted the world to see it. Someone wanted Sweden to feel it. Someone wanted to prove that even the safest nations are vulnerable. And they succeeded. In the years since, countless documentaries, books, and podcasts have dissected the Stockholm helicopter robbery. Not because of the money, not because of the arrests, but because of what it represented. A team of thieves challenged the entire structure of a nation's security using imagination, precision, and planning. The robbery exposed flaws. It embarrassed institutions. It forced change. And yet, the mystery remains. The helicopter was found, the suspects were caught, but the mastermind, the motive, the money, all still missing. Some say it was a criminal genius. Others say it was an inside job gone rogue. Some whisper it was planned by someone who studied police from the inside. And others believe the real architect is free today, living quietly, waiting for the right moment to disappear again. But one thing is certain. On that September morning in 2009, as the rotors cut through the sky and a group of masked men vanished with millions, Sweden witnessed the dawn of a new age of crime. A crime so daring, so theatrical, so flawlessly executed, that it still feels unreal. But it was real, and it happened in the heart of a city that never expected it. This has been Dark Ledger Episode 3, presented to you by Elearn College, where the shadows speak and we listen.